Hey, this is Tracy Lewis with Stuff and Things. I am working on spring cards. I have Playing in the Rain out, and I wanted to show you a variety of ways to color the images. Here is two of the fun critters, and then clouds, and I'm going to be coloring the clouds as many ways as I possibly can. So I'm going to start with a smoky slate Stampin' Right marker. What I like about Stampin' Right markers is that you can use them to ink up your stamps. You can take them, you can travel with them. I actually bought them back when I lost everything. I initially bought a set of Stampin' Right markers so that I could be off the ground and running very quickly. And then I could take my time buying the re-inkers and then fill in. And I used spots because I was traveling. So these were my go-to when I was just starting out rebuilding my stamping collection. What I like the least about these is that for coloring, they're very unforgiving. So they put down a pretty heavy amount of ink, and you can't lighten it up like you can with alcohol markers, which is what makes alcohol markers so much fun to use. So if I were to be using these, because this is all I had, I would probably just do an accent and under the cloud, like a shadow for the clouds. These will get cut out, and since they are just my sample clouds, I am going to just do one cloud with each coloring style. So I would use them for shadows if I was doing clouds, and you can't really do shading or blending with them. You can, however, use a Teflon sheet, which is my next example, and you can ink up your Teflon sheet. You can very lightly, you have to very much control your water. So here is an old, I think this is an old Stampin' Up pen, a water brush. They have a new style now. I'm gonna get this, I filled it with water, but I haven't primed it yet. There we go. Okay, so if you're going to use basic white, you have to be very, very careful. So I would have paper towel handy. I am going to bring this back to just damp. And I might try to add some lighter gray to the clouds. Be very careful, because if you add too much water, you're going to get puckering of the basic white. So that is two ways to use the Stampin' Right markers. So we're going to let that dry. I'm looking at it now to see if it's puckering. You could use a heat gun. That would help control. I'm going to not use a heat gun to save time, but that would be if you wanted, if all you had were the Stampin' Right markers, I would be using very lightly wet. The other option for you to consider is to take a blender pen, which is a liquid. Let's see if that's cleaned. I use it all the time in my coloring, on my coloring channel. And so here is another way you can add lightened up color. So far we have only used the Stampin' Right marker 3 different ways. And again, if you want to eliminate the possibility of puckering, if you're using some wet with this, you will go ahead and use a heat gun to dry it. So that is the first tool. I am going to now, along the same lines, I'm going to do just a different color because I can. I have Blueberry Bushel here. I have a spot of it, and I have the full-size pad. What I would do with the spot is go ahead, and that is plenty, just one face down push we'll get it wet. And then I'm going to take this cloud over here. I'm going to go ahead and do the Stampin' Right marker a little bit. I am going to then take, you can do the water pen or you can do the Stampin' Up. I would say of the three ways, my favorite way that would give me the most control and keep it the least wet is to use the blender pen. That is my choice if I am having to use the inks. And I have good control. I can get some lights going. So that is a preferred way for me to color of the three ways where you're using dye inks. The ink in the Stampin' Right marker and the ink in the spot, as well as the ink in the full-size pad, is all the same. So now I'm going to show you, I hope I will remember that those are off to the side there. Here is a full-size pad. You do the squish trick. I don't open these very often, clearly. There we go. And see how it did not actually wet. The old pads did this a lot easier. Let's see if I got it. There we go. That's actually too much. All right, so I can't open it all the way. I have to leave the ink exposed. I, again, between the aqua painter or the blender pen, I would pick the blender pen. Make sure it's clean. You can clean it off just by running it on some paper. And I'm just going to do a little more coloring here. Oh, that's very dark. So I'm going to go ahead and rub some off. I don't want it that dark. But the nice thing is, unlike the Stampin' Right marker, I have the option of going lighter. Make it cute, puffy, cloud-like. Watching my wet, it's still a wet medium, and you will, you can get the surface of the basic white to pucker. So that showed the Stampin' Right marker, and this is a little bit of the Stampin' Right marker, and then the spot, as well as then how to ink up the dye ink pads. Now we're going to move on. We are going to move to the pencils, the colored pencils. You can use these colored pencils. They are watercolor pencils. You can use them dry or you can use them wet. So with this particular cloud up here that has not been colored yet, and these are drying nicely. I don't see any buckling or puckering of the basic white. So I was good and kept the amount of wet, light wet enough that it did not damage the fibers in any way. So now you can, I'm going to do it dry. We'll do this half of the cloud dry, where I am just taking the basic gray. It goes on a smooth surface fairly light, which I really am glad that I can control, and I can make these clouds like puffy. I could even ink it with basic gray and then take this basic gray pencil and just really do an artistic, dry, safe, nothing's going to happen to the paper. Great dry representation of this cloud. I can go in now and get darker by adding more pressure. You control the pressure of the pencil by how close your hand is. If you want to get it really dark, you go in and make sure your fingers are very close to the pigment. And if you're wanting to just do some sketchy things with light pressure, move your hand back. That will really help, especially if you're heavier handed by nature. And I am light-handed, but I also do enjoy kind of that sketchy look. Don't want to get too crazy with it. I am now going to take the blender pen. It is clean, and I am going to wet some of this. This is, again, a watercolor ink, so I can keep it sketchy, and then I can also wet it down and spread it and treat it somewhat like watercolor. It gives us a lot better control than if you're using the Stampin' Write markers, and the cost for each marker versus buying a set of pencils, it's night and day. The pencils to me are just a tool in your arsenal that is really inexpensive. There's 2 assortments, a variety of colors, and I really like, of the 3 clouds, I like the pencil the best. Okay, so next I'm going to grab another set of clouds to play with. I am not quite done with the pencils yet. I want to show you that you can actually put some pencil down quite a bit. You can then pick up some of that pencil, that color, and you can do cloud coloring just like before, only this time I am not risking my pencil doing a stroke that I don't like, and I am going to give this a wet look to the cloud. Okay. The next technique, I am now moving on. We're almost done with all of the options I can come up with. I am now going to grab the light blueberry bushel. Oh, and I have, let's do a gray, since we're doing gray here. I have both the light smoky slate, and let's make sure we have both. Oh, that's dark. Dark and light smoky slate. Starting with the light, you can opt, some people like to start with the dark, but look at how dark that already is. Again, going with kind of that puffy cloud look. And then that isn't just an outline version of the cloud. And then if you want to go for a fully colored cloud, I'll take this little guy and I'm just going to color him all the way in with the light, which to me seems pretty dark. And then I will take the dark. I'll take the bullet. I will tell you that any chance you can, use the bullet nib over the brush nib will make your pen last longer. The brush nibs on these do have a shelf life. The more you use them, the more you risk them fraying. I find these pens last forever ink-wise. What's going to happen first, before the ink runs out, you will have a frayed brush end. So use the bullet nib anytime you can. So I've got some light and dark, and I still think it's quite dark. And now I'm going to show you the secret weapon, which I should have just right here somewhere. I had the white, here it is, the blender. I call it a pusher because really what it does is push the ink to the other side of the paper, lightening up this side. So where it calls it a color lifter, it really is a color pusher. Again, use the bullet nib as you can. I also find, see these little dots? This particular pen, I don't know if it's mine, but mine has always been super wet. And then I live in Florida. It's very humid. These stay sealed. They stay level. You're supposed to store them sideways. So I have the full set of the blender containers, the Stampin' storage. So these are always protected. And if you have a problem with the nibs being too wet and maybe having a blobbing, what I have found fixes that is to open up both sides. So I have both sides open so it can breathe. I already noticed that, see, and notice those little droplets are already gone because they're alcohol based. So they don't hurt anything. You probably don't want to get them on your artwork, so I would put your artwork aside if you're opening a pen that you know has some problems with the leaking. And this particular color pusher, as I call it, even though it's called a color lifter, is really wet and juicy. I think probably all of them are. So I'm able to push my dark lines and soften them to whatever I want them to look like. And the nice thing, same with the pencils, if you're using it dry and you have more forgiveness with the effect of the alcohol wet on these papers versus the water wet. So I can work this. I can decide, oh, I want to add more color. So I've pushed some of the color away. I've lightened up my cloud nicely. I think it looks really good, but I would love to darken those two lines back up. And then this third line I've left dark. So I'm gonna put the lid on. And I'm going to grab the bullet side of this one. Notice I kind of pulled it away just in case. It's still wet. You could dry it completely before you come back in, but I kind of like the spidering effect that the still wet paper gets. So that is my cloud. Let's see, how many ways have I done the clouds? These three clouds were done with, or these two clouds were done with the Stampin' Up marker, spots, aqua painter, and the blender pen. I will go ahead and list in the description, I will go ahead and list every single tool that I used to create these different versions of the clouds. This cloud up here used a pencil dry, and then I took the blender, between the blender and the aqua painter. I think the blender pen is the safest tool. It lasts a really long time. This is very old. This is probably 4 or 5 years old, and I use it not daily, but I use it probably a couple times a week. And then this one up here, again, I used the blender to soften and wet the various lines that I generated using the basic gray pencil that you can use dry. This particular cloud, I went ahead and I put the basic gray on a piece of scrap paper. I don't think it will apply. If I come back here and I try to add, it won't work with the Teflon sheet. The silicone mat is the same. I don't think that you can color the pencil pigment onto either of those surfaces. Just put them on paper. And then use either the aqua painter, but I prefer the blender pen. It's a little bit less. And I darkened up this cloud. And I just did accents on the bottom, kind of kept it whimsical. This cloud up here, I used the light blender, or blend, and just did some outlining. I talked about using the brush nib as, the bullet nib over the brush nib, and I just did some lines like this. And then this cloud, I colored with the light solid, and then I used the color lifter to lift away. And see, now it's dry, and I want to come back in here. Oops, I want to use the bullet nib. You can see I have used the other nib, and it is starting to fray just a tiny bit on me. So I go for the bullet anytime I can. My blends I have owned, I buy them as soon as the colors are released, and this is my original lifter pen from 2018. Very, very old. And it's still really wet and juicy. And yes, I own Copic markers, and both these, I say that these, even though they are not refillable, they last a very long time, just like the Copics do. I don't think I've had to refill any of my Copics there. So I went ahead and cleaned up my cloud. You will find as it dries that you'll get some different formations that aren't the same as when it's wet. It tends to lighten up. And that completes this particular episode. Video. I just wanted to show you all of the different coloring techniques for all of the different tools. Let me know if you have other coloring techniques that I have missed. These products are all products that Stampin' Up sells. You got the Stampin' Up marker, you have your pencil, you have the aqua painter, blender pencil, pen, and a blend. Hey, future me popping in. I want to clarify one very important point. If you are using Stampin' Blends or alcohol markers, you stamp your image with black dye ink. So it says Memento Fade Resisting Dye Ink, Tuxedo Black. So any dye ink will do, any color. If you are doing a water treatment or wet, which all of these were wet, you want to use what is called StazOn ink. And I don't have a full-size pad, so I keep re-wetting my little StazOn spot. And again, any color will do. This will not work if you accidentally use StazOn and you use a Stampin' Blend marker. It will bleed the image, the stamped image, and reverse of that, if you use water or wet on Memento dye ink or any dye ink. So these classic pads are also water-based dye ink. So you definitely do not want to apply water. And the blender pen needs to be used very carefully. But I recommend, if you're going to do any wet treatment that is not for sure alcohol-based, and the blender pen tells me it's acid-free, xylene-free, dual tip flexible brushes. I'm reading the small print. I have not seen anything that tells me whether these are alcohol based or not, so tread carefully with the blender pens. I find that they work just fine on either if you're very careful and you keep from going too much close to the edges. All right, that's all I've got for the future me. Back to the regular programming. I believe that covers everything. Then I do want to walk through a finished card. This card is actually a card. It's an older card from last year, I think, because this DSP was the DSP that coordinated with it. And this card is a card swap card. And the only thing I had to do to it was add this little ribbon and add the sequins. So the coloring job was not done by me. I think it was very well done. To me, it looks like they did probably a wet application, either the blender pen or the aqua painter, and I see some lines. So they definitely used blueberry bushel, and I see some pen lines. So maybe they did alcohol. But however they did it a fantastic job. Very, very sweet. It's a very simple card. I will go ahead and do the measurements for you. And the back, I think I put this white. I don't think she had white back here, but she might have, because this was a completed card. Like I said, the only thing I had to add to this card was the Night of Navy crossed little trim to finish it off, and then the 3 sequins. So that's all I've got for today. Let me know your thoughts. Again, if I missed any coloring technique, let me know. I tried to cover everything I could think of. I am a colorist. That is like my thing. I love to do. I love stamping images, coloring them, and then doing the die cuts. That is what initially intrigued me about card making, was being able to cut out my images after I colored them. And and that was like 10 years ago, so I still maintain that as my preference of cards to make. Do all the YouTube things, like, comment, share, and subscribe. And as always, thanks for watching.